Hey everyone. You know how it is, right? You wake up, it's January 29th, 2025, and you just feel like you're drowning in data, trying to
Yeah,
figure out what's happening in the markets.
definitely.
That's exactly why we're here today, for a deep dive into the trends that actually matter.
hmm
And so you don't have to feel that information overload.
Right, cutting through the noise and getting to those insights that actually impact you. And today, we're doing that with some help from Pantheon AI's morning briefing.
Oh yeah, PantheonAI, they're like,
They're kind of like your information co-pilot.
yeah, an information co-pilot. I
Yeah.
like that, making sure you navigate through all the turbulence smoothly. And you know what? From this briefing I'm seeing, it looks like there's definitely some turbulence ahead.
Oh, yeah.
We've got the S&P 500 dipping just slightly. The
Uh,
Dow Jones seems to be like defying gravity. It's heading upwards. But then the Nasdaq, it's taking a bit of a nosedive. So what's going on here? What's driving this kind of mixed bag of performance?
well, the divergence we're seeing, it really kind of boils down to, I think, a cocktail of caution and optimism, and then a little bit of tech jitters, maybe. So that slight dip in the S&P 500, it's probably reflecting a broader sense of uncertainty in the market. You know, everyone's kind of waiting, holding their breath to see what the Fed's going to decide about interest rates at their upcoming meeting.
Yeah, that Fed meeting, it's like this elephant in the room, right? It's like, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
Nobody knows.
And that uncertainty, it's really hitting the tech-heavy Nasdaq, which is always more sensitive to interest rate changes. Now, the Dow Jones, it's kind of interesting because its positive performance might seem counterintuitive, but it's likely being driven by some really strong earnings reports in specific sectors,
Okay.
particularly industrials and financials. So,
So there's some good news
some good news there.
amidst all the uncertainty. Yeah.
Okay, so a bit of a tug of war
Yeah.
between good news and uncertainty. Speaking of uncertainty, though, the morning briefing also mentions that the Atlanta Fed just took a machete to their GDP Now forecast.
Oh, wow.
They slashed it all the way down to 2.3%.
That's a pretty dramatic revision.
It is. For those unfamiliar, the GDP Now model provides a real-time estimate of economic growth, so the specific cut. It's based on weaker than expected inventory and trade data, and it has a lot of economists kind of scratching their heads right now.
Yeah.
Because it suggests that the economy might be cooling down faster than anyone anticipated. And that throws a wrench into all the predictions for early 2025.
It definitely throws a wrench into things.
Mhm.
And it kind of reminds us that things change quickly. And even the experts sometimes don't have a crystal ball.
Hmm.
Now, let's zoom in on some individual companies for a second. PantheonAI highlights some pretty contrasting fortunes. For example,
Mhm.
they point out that Moderna has been downgraded,
Oh,
and they're facing some serious headwinds. What happened there? Weren't they like a pandemic darling?
they were. But the post-pandemic reality, it's hitting some companies harder than others. Moderna, in particular, has had to cut their revenue guidance again. And investors are starting to get spooked. They're grappling with declining demand for their COVID-19 vaccine.
Yeah.
As the pandemic eases and their efforts to kind of diversify into other areas, they haven't gained that much traction yet.
It's like they need to pivot
Yeah.
and find their footing in this new landscape.
Right.
But then you've got T-Mobile, which seems to be singing a completely different tune.
Absolutely.
Right.
While Moderna is struggling, T-Mobile is crushing it. They just released their Q4 earnings.
Okay.
And they not only exceeded expectations, but they also projected really robust growth for the coming year. It seems that their focus on 5G expansion and customer acquisition, it's paying off
Wow.
big time.
Okay, so a tale of two companies. One struggling to adapt, the other one's riding the wave of change. And then there's MicroStrategy, which seems to be placing like a massive bet on the future of Bitcoin. They've been on this Bitcoin buying spree for a while now.
They have, and it's definitely an unconventional strategy, especially when you contrast it with a company like Moderna, struggling to find its footing in a changing market. But some analysts are starting to whisper about a potential turnaround for MicroStrategy,
Oh,
fueled by their Bitcoin holdings.
okay.
They believe that if Bitcoin rebounds, MicroStrategy could be sitting pretty.
Well, it's a bold move, that's for sure. It'll be fascinating to see if that bet on Bitcoin ends up being like a stroke of genius or a costly gamble. Now, this next item in the briefing caught my eye. Because honestly, I did a double take. PantheonAI reports that GJT has launched a new financial service called Truth.Fi.
It seems the former president is venturing into the world of finance.
Right.
And he's specifically targeting what he calls American patriots, with a platform that focuses on what they're calling crypto securities.
Crypto securities?
Yeah.
What are the...
Essentially, they're investment products built on blockchain technology. So think of them like traditional stocks and bonds, but with the crypto twist. This move by DJT is definitely raising eyebrows and sparking conversations about the growing intersection of politics, finance, and digital currencies.
It's like a microcosm of the changing landscape of finance, all wrapped up in one headline. Speaking of changing landscapes, PantheonAI also mentions that HPE and Juniper had a little meeting with the Department of Justice about a possible lawsuit. The details are still pretty hush-hush, but it sounds like the tech sector might be facing some increased regulatory scrutiny.
It does. And while we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle yet, this meeting could be a signal of a broader crackdown on the tech industry. And, regulatory actions can have a domino effect, so it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds and whether other tech giants find themselves in the hot seat.
Yeah. Makes you wonder what other shoes might drop. All right, let's shift gears to something that affects everyone, the economy as a whole. The briefing highlights that the U.S. trade deficit in goods hit a record high right before the new administration stepped in. That's a pretty big deal, isn't it?
It is. A large trade deficit can create a lot of challenges, especially for administration focused on reducing it. It can impact everything, from currency values to domestic job markets. So a lot is riding on how the administration handles this situation and what policies they implement to address this record deficit.
Okay, so we've got a potential economic storm brewing with the trade deficit.
Yeah.
The upcoming Fed meeting adding to the mix. Let's switch gears and talk about something a bit more uplifting, shall we? What about some good news from the world of tech and innovation?
Sounds good to me, and I've got just the thing. PantheonAI highlights a win for the commercial space sector. Planet, a satellite imagery company, just scored a massive $230 million contract for their Pelican satellites.
Pelican satellites, that sounds interesting. What do these satellites do?
These satellites are designed to provide high-resolution imagery of Earth, and there's a growing demand for that kind of data from various sectors like agriculture, disaster relief, and even urban planning. So this contract is a major boost for Planet and a testament to the growing importance of commercial space endeavors.
So a bright spot in the tech landscape and a win for those looking to the stars.
Exactly.
All right. Before we dive into the next part of the briefing, let's take a quick pause and recap what we've uncovered so far. What are the key takeaways for you?
Sure. I'd say the biggest takeaway is that we're seeing a lot of uncertainty in the markets right now.
Okay.
The upcoming Fed meeting is a major wild card. And the Atlanta Fed's GDP Now revision suggests the economy might be slowing down faster than we thought. But amidst all that uncertainty, there are also some bright spots. Certain sectors like industrials and financials are posting strong earnings, and companies like T-Mobile are thriving by adapting to the new realities.
That's a great summary. We've got a mixed bag of good news and bad news, with some intriguing trends emerging. And we'll be unpacking all of this and more as we continue our deep dive.
That's right. We'll be exploring some sector-specific trends, the rise of digital currencies, and the global implications of everything we've discussed so far. So stay tuned.
Welcome back. Now let's zoom in on some of these sector-specific trends that PantheonAI highlights. For instance, the technology sector. It seems like they're navigating a very choppy sea right now.
You're telling me. They're facing regulatory pressures, shifting consumer demands,
Right.
and of course those looming interest rate decisions from the Fed. It's like a perfect storm. But, like we saw with T-Mobile, some companies are finding ways to not just weather the storm, but they're riding the waves to success. Right. T-Mobile is a great example of how agility and a laser focus on customer needs can really make all the difference, even in a really turbulent environment. They saw the 5G wave coming, and they paddled hard to catch it. But on the flip side, we have companies like Moderna that are finding it tougher to adapt to the shifting tides of the post-pandemic world.
Like they stayed out too far when the tide was high.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, their vaccine was in such high demand during the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's almost like they had blinders on to what might come next.
That's a great analogy. And to make matters even more complicated, you have those potential regulatory hurdles popping up. Remember that HPE and Juniper meeting with the Department of Justice? That adds another layer of uncertainty for the entire tech sector.
It's like they're trying to innovate and grow while walking on a tightrope, constantly looking over their shoulder for the next regulatory challenge.
So you can say the tech sector is definitely one to watch, right? Full of potential, but also full of potential pitfalls. Absolutely. And that brings us to another sector that's undergoing some pretty dramatic shifts, the energy industry. PantheonAI points to a gradual but significant move towards sustainability.
Yeah, I'm seeing more and more headlines about renewable energy, electric vehicles,
Right.
that sort of thing. What's driving this change?
It's a combination of factors. You've got regulatory frameworks pushing for cleaner energy solutions. Consumers are increasingly demanding eco-friendly options. They're voting with their wallets, so to speak. And on top of that, you have technological advancements, making renewable energy sources more viable and cost-effective.
So it sounds like the energy sector is kind of at a crossroads. You've got the old guard of fossil fuels facing mounting pressure to evolve, and then you've got all these new players emerging in the renewable energy space.
That's exactly right. And this transition is creating some really interesting opportunities for companies investing in green technologies. So it's definitely a sector to keep an eye on, especially if you're interested in aligning your investments with a more sustainable future.
Okay. From rockets and satellites to wind turbines and solar panels, it's amazing how quickly things are changing. Now let's talk about a sector that's been in the news a lot lately, finance. PantheonAI specifically calls out all the buzz surrounding digital currencies and all these fintech innovations.
Yeah. It's hard to ignore the rise of cryptocurrencies and their impact on the financial landscape. We saw this reflected in the launch of Truth.Fi, which, as we discussed earlier, is aiming to carve out a niche within the crypto market by targeting a very specific demographic.
Yeah, that Truth.Fi launch was definitely a head-scratcher. It's like they're trying to blend politics, finance, and digital currencies into this very specific product.
It's definitely unconventional, but it really highlights how traditional financial services are having to adapt and incorporate digital assets into their offerings. Blockchain technology is becoming more and more mainstream, and that's shaking things up.
Like the old rules are being rewritten right before our eyes, and with all this innovation.
It comes a certain level of risk.
Right. I mean, crypto is still the Wild West in a lot of ways.
That's true. There are still a lot of unknowns, and it's crucial for anyone thinking about dipping their toes into the crypto pool to really do their research and understand the risks involved. But the potential for disruption and transformation is undeniable.
Okay. So we've zoomed in on some specific sectors. Now I'm curious to zoom back out and think about the bigger picture. PantheonAI emphasizes that what happens in the U.S. doesn't stay in the U.S., especially when it comes to economic factors. What are the global implications of all these trends we've been discussing?
Well, think about it this way. The U.S. economy is a massive ship, and when it changes course, it creates ripples that are felt across the entire ocean. So take interest rates, for example. The Fed's decisions, they have a ripple effect across the globe. They impact everything from exchange rates to international trade.
Right. It's like a butterfly effect.
Yeah.
A decision made in Washington can set off a chain reaction that impacts businesses and individuals on the other side of the world.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the U.S. trade deficit, which, as we discussed, is at a record high. That's going to play a major role in shaping global economic relationships. And it could lead to some interesting shifts in the balance of power.
So it sounds like we're all interconnected in this complex web of global finance.
Yeah.
And with all these moving pieces, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. I mean, how is the average person supposed to keep up with all this and make sense of it all?
That's a great question. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information out there. But remember, you don't have to become an economist overnight.
Okay.
The key is to focus on what's relevant to you and your financial goals. What are your priorities? What are your risk tolerances? What are the industries or companies that align with your values and interests? By asking yourself these questions, you can start to filter out the noise and identify the signals that actually matter most.
That's great advice. It's like finding your own North Star in the midst of a financial storm. And speaking of signals, PantheonAI ends its briefing by pointing to the upcoming Fed meeting as a pivotal event. That could set the tone for the rest of the year.
Absolutely. The decisions made at that meeting will have a huge impact on markets and the economy as a whole. And beyond that, advancements in technology, shifts in regulatory landscapes, and global events, they will continue to shape the opportunities and risks we face in the financial world.
It's like we're standing at the edge of a new era with so much potential and so much uncertainty, all rolled into one. It's exciting, nerve-wracking, and everything in between.
I couldn't agree more. But that's what makes the financial world so fascinating. It's constantly evolving, and there's always something new to learn and explore. Remember, knowledge is power. The more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the complexities of the financial world and achieve your financial goals.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today. from market trends and sector spotlights to the rise of crypto and the global implications of it all. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought. We've gone through so much information today. It's so easy to get kind of lost in the headlines and the numbers.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what from all of this really stood out to you? What got you maybe thinking, or even a little worried?
That's a great question. For me, I think it was that stark contrast between the companies riding the wave of change and those who are struggling to adapt. Like we talked about T-Mobile versus Moderna.
Yeah.
It highlights how important it is to stay ahead of the curve and be willing to pivot when the landscape shifts.
And it's not even just about reacting to change. It's about anticipating it. T-Mobile, they saw the 5G opportunity coming, and they made the investments necessary to capitalize on it. But Moderna, they seem to be playing catch-up now that the pandemic boom has kind of subsided.
And, it's also important to remember that no company operates in a vacuum.
Right.
You've got all these external factors like regulatory pressures and global economic shifts. They can have a huge impact no matter how well a company is managed internally.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings me to another point that really struck me. It's the fact that the lines between politics, finance, and tech, they're becoming increasingly blurred. We've got Truth.Fi, the trade deficit, these potential lawsuits. It's all interconnected, isn't it?
It is. I mean, financial decisions are influenced by political policies. Technological innovations disrupt traditional models. And everything is happening on this global scale. So understanding those connections, it's crucial for making sense of it all.
It's almost like you need a multi-dimensional chessboard just to keep track of all the moving pieces.
It really is. And remember, it's not just about understanding the individual pieces. It's about how they interact with each other and how they influence each other.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what is the one key takeaway you would leave our listeners with? What should they be pondering as they navigate this very complex financial world?
With the Fed meeting coming up and all of these trends unfolding, I would just encourage everyone to think about what sectors or companies are you most curious about right now and why? What's piqued your interest? What opportunities do you see? What potential risks do you see? Because the more you engage with these questions, the better equipped you'll be to make those informed decisions. And maybe even capitalize on the shifts that are happening all around us.
That's a fantastic thought to leave everyone with. It's about turning information into insight and using that insight to navigate the financial landscape. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay ahead of the curve.